The descriptive writing task is based on a person or a relatable scene with a particular focal point, like the one you see on this screen. It won't be a painting, but it'll always be a colour photograph. Successful students of descriptive writing will understand that description is a shared experience between the writer and the reader. And what the writer needs to think about is always drawing their reader into their creative world. So you have a look at the ideas on the right hand side. It's not necessarily about what you can see or smell or touch. It's about how you react to the things you can see and smell and hear and touch, and how you feel about it, and what kind of memories are invoked, and how it causes you to reflect on your own life. You want to be able to create a mood not only in the sense of place, but also in the mind of the writer and the reader. And that's why you want to try and engage as many of your personal impressions as you possibly can, because that will bring the scene alive. Now, I thought I would share with you some typical images that you're likely to see on your exam paper, and as you'll notice, you could be asked to write either about a person or a place. Now, we're focusing on a scene in this session. The most important thing to look at from the written text on this slide is the word suggested. So what that actually means is talking about the given scene, or you could just talk about something that exists outside of the scene, or you could even be inventive and take an aspect of the scene and then place that within your own context. So essentially the image is there as a sort of trampoline. You spring off it into your own writing. It's there to give you a stimulus to promote some thinking at the planning stage. So here is a typical exam question. It's exactly how it will look. And there are a few things to note here. First of all, they set you a scenario. Imagine that you're part of a writing competition and you're going to be judged. You're not actually going to be entered for that writing competition. They're trying to set a context so you know the sorts of things to be writing. In other words, engaging your reader. Going back to that third slide we looked at. There's that word suggested again. Notice that it asks you to either describe or narrate. You write a story or a description. You don't need to do both tasks, and you can choose which one of those is your strength. And notice as it's suggested by the picture that you could take your story, your narrative, into whatever realms you would like. You could be the train, or you could come just into that scene, or you could take it from the perspective of the sea, or you could imagine you were a person inside the house and recount your description or your narrative from that perspective. So you can do anything you want to. You have the freedom of choice at this stage. If you look at the bottom right hand side, you'll see the marks are allocated. Now AO5 is the 24 mark response, and that is marked for content and organisation. So they're things like ideas, paragraphs, and linking, connecting your ideas. And less significant in the amount, but not necessarily significant if you want to boost your marks up to the next grade boundary, is the technical accuracy. This is AO6. It's essentially everything to do with spelling, punctuation, grammar, and your choice of sentence structures. Now, once you have decided which task you're going to complete, this is your first stage. Just spend time with the image. And if you notice from all the bubbles around, there are lots of questions there. There are no definitive decisions, no answers. This student has just sat down and just emptied their head. Okay, top left hand side. What am I feeling from this scene? So what kind of mood do I want to generate? Just jot down a couple of notes. Keywords will be fine. How am I going to approach this? Which perspective am I going to be thinking from? Now, if you want to use your lesson time to practice writing either in the first person or the third person, you'll get to know your strength. And before you even go into the exam hall, you can start thinking about which perspective you're going to choose, no matter what the given image will be. And that's one of your knowns before you go into the room. You can then look at the things that interest you, because if it interests you, then it's therefore going to interest the reader, and you'll say something that's a little bit more engaging about it. And then you'll see anything that you'll notice. Just literally jot down scrawls, diagrams, arrows, links, connections, however you best work. You're essentially mind mapping on the image. and it's perfectly fine for you to write notes and annotation on the actual exam paper, which is why at the beginning of this presentation I asked you to print out a copy of the image. Okay, then you can start thinking about the types of words that come to your mind. I've chosen the example of the movement of the waves because that was the thing that I found was most interesting for me. But you might want to look at the colour of the waves or the shape of the waves. It's completely up to you, but you start to generate word lists, vocabulary you might choose. And then you want to try and put yourself into the mind of some of the people inside. So instead of looking from an outside perspective, you go into the mind of any of these imagined characters you could possibly see in the scene. And you're going to think about their thoughts and their reflections, everything we mentioned on scene 3, to try and create an experience from this picture. You don't have to limit yourself to the image. You can go outside of the shot, the top, the bottom, the left or the right. What might be outside there, it doesn't have to be accurate, but it does have to be realistic. You could then think about, in this case, the journeying of the train. Where has it been? Where is it going through? And what kind of narrative you want to start to construct from what is happening. So at this stage, you're literally just generating ideas and scrawling down things that come into your head. You might not even use everything that you're generating at this stage. As a guide, I'd spend a good 5 minutes doing this before you even start writing your narrative, or in this case, description, on paper. So here is a model of the note-taking stage. And if you look again on the left-hand side, you'll see that they're just individual words. What am I feeling? What kind of mood am I generating from this image? Can I try and get my vocabulary to be as precise as possible? And then at the top, I've chosen to be a little bit clever here because the thing that appealed to me most of all as a writing was the train. That seemed to be the largest, most dominant image within the picture. And so I thought how interesting it would be to talk as if I were that train. So I'm going to use the first person and I'm going to try and adopt it from the perspective as if I'm in a battle against the sea. It's nature against man-made wrought iron and steel, which is why you can see words like warrior and enmity appearing. Notice I didn't say enemy, but I'm trying to stretch my vocabulary, so I've chosen the word enmity, which means an enemy with somebody else. On the right hand side then, I'm going to look at some details rather than just looking at the bigger picture of the train. So I'm going to imagine that there's one passenger on there, and I might start to explore some of their feelings and experiences of this scene. And I've taken that word I learned from Year 7 class, the sublime, from the Romantic poets, and I'm going to talk about their feelings of awe and fear. And then I'm going to start thinking about the other objects in the image. So I've gone wide, I've gone narrow, and now I'm going to pick 2 or 3 things that I think are quite interesting that stand out for me. So I'm going to talk about the houses and how I react to them as a train, and I'm going to talk about the waves and how I feel they're interacting with me as a train. And then just outside of the picture down at the bottom, what I've imagined in my mind's eye that is the safety of the station. And I'm going to try and create that tension and drama as the train is trying to run, pace, storm ahead to that station. And then I'm going to talk about myself in terms of feeling vulnerable and lost, which is a complete contrast to that warrior imagery at the top. And then I'm going to talk about the sense of determination and mission again to back up that warrior imagery. So I'm going to choose 2 separate types of imagery: innocence of a child and the strength of a warrior and having an enemy. And then I might start to pull out other little things that just intrigue me. I haven't really organised them at this point. Again, I'm just emptying my head. So I've got things like the windows I've imagined are really thin, and I've looked at the eyes of the windows, imagine it's like the eyes of the soul, and that they're watching. So just generating ideas at this stage. Right, Let's recap where we are so far then. We've looked at the image, we've asked ourselves questions, and we've generated ideas in note form. At the moment, we've literally just emptied our heads and it's all in any random order. This part is where you organise your ideas. This is the difference between a mediocre response and an excellent response. Now, as you can see on the screen, you have two assessment objectives addressed here. On the left hand side is content, organisation and linguistic devices. That's AO5, remember 24 marks. And on the right hand side you have your vocabulary, sentence structure, punctuation, and of course don't forget spelling. That's AO6, that's worth 16 marks. On this slide I'm going to talk you through AO5. AQA loves it when students move around the image. So I've recommended 5 different paragraphs, hence the 5 points in the content section on the left hand side. The first aim is just to give an overview, talk about the mood, the general feelings, the main things that you're noticing, give a sense of place and space. In the second paragraph then, take the largest area. In this case it happens to be the sea. And so you can describe your reactions, feelings, responses to the sea. In the third paragraph you can then conduct a change. So if you've already described things outside, you might decide at this point you want to go inside the narrator's head and start talking about their memories or a flashback, what it reminds them of, or what the place was like before you, the narrator, even entered it. Maybe you could choose it at the end of the day when it's all very calm, or on a summer's day when that stormy water is not available. Then you can see number 4 is the detail, thinking carefully about one specific thing. On the model I gave you 2 examples of this. One with the slit-like windows of the houses, and the other one was the passenger on the train and looking at their thoughts and feelings. And the last one, number 5, is how I imagine an over-the-shoulder shot. So as you were walking away from that scene and you turned your head over the shoulder, what would be your lasting impression? What would you like to communicate to your reader? Then in linguistic devices you can use any of these. Here's just a range, some examples. If you've got others that you think are going to work better, then by all means use those. Freedom of choice is yours. But what you need to have at the forefront of your mind is slide 3 again. It's your reader. So if you are going to use a simile or a metaphor, what you want to aim to do with it is to take something that's familiar with them in their lives now as they're reading your narrative, your description, and then you want to try and communicate your experience of this place by using that simile. So for example, if you wanted to talk about the sea and what it was tasting like and smelling like, you might want to use the metaphor of the salt sea face roared in my face. So you've got the idea of personification, it's roaring like a person, an angry monster, but you've also got the metaphor of the salt as well. So once you've thought about AO5, which order you're going to place your description in, and which linguistic devices you're going to use to draw your reader into your description, now you want to start thinking very specifically adventurous, imaginative choices of vocabulary should enter at this stage. So if you can see the example on the right hand side under vocabulary, you have colour imagery. Now this is where you want to avoid telling and instead showing your readers what the scene is like. So you wouldn't say, for example, that it was a red sun across black skies. You might want to talk about the flaming sun across the ebony skies. So you choose words which suggest the colour, show rather than tell us what the actual colour is. And it'll be the same for nature imagery and any words which communicate your thoughts and feelings, which are mood words, and then the description themselves. You don't have to use all of those. Again, it's just a repertoire and you can dip in and out of those word choices as long as you're always thinking about that reader and how to engage them in your scene. On the bottom right hand side then, a sentence structure and punctuation. Now there's nothing more frustrating for a teacher or an examiner to see a student who has excellent vocabulary but just hasn't thought about how they're going to organise the way in which they reveal that excellent vocabulary. So we want to try and make sure that sentences are as varied as possible. If you want to hold information back, just drop in a minor sentence. If you really want to elaborate and show what your narrator's thinking, their reactions to the scene in front of them, add lots of little clauses. Just comma them off. It becomes a complex sentence. Don't be afraid to step outside of your description and ask your reader a question directly. and try and use as a rule of thumb 5 or more punctuation marks, because this then shows that you're actually shaping and thinking about your choice of sentences, and that means that you're taking the hand of your reader and you're leading them through the scene, deliberately choosing what you want to reveal and what you want to hold back from them. This is where the really clear, careful planning then creates an excellent piece of written description. So here's just a quick look of what that model might look like. So we're going to go to AO5 again, content on the left hand side. And the first feelings that I would like to explore with my reader is the idea of excitement and wildness. I might talk about the nature of this great storm hitting the sides of us. And then I'm going to choose as my main area the houses. I don't have to do this, but I've chosen to do it, so there's no wrong or right answer. And then I'm going to just focus on the detail of the waves. I might think about movement words there, choosing my verbs carefully. Then I'm going to go into the detail. I haven't decided I'm going to take those slit of the windows. For this piece of writing, I'm going to talk about the one passenger who might be sitting on one of the train carriages. And then finally, ahead is going to be the station. And if you go back to my notes, you'll notice that all of those things are there in the notes. I've just organised them. So I'm literally transporting them from one note to another. Notice also there are any key words here. There are not long sentences. I'm not taking too long to organise my ideas. I've spent 5 minutes asking myself questions and looking at the image, and now I'm going to spend 5 minutes planning this. Okay. Then linguistic devices underneath. Again, I jotted down a couple of these in the planning stage when I was just emptying my head, and now I'm really finely honing which ones I want to use. And what I will do at the writing up stage, I'll actually tick off the simile, the metaphor, the personification that I've used to make sure that I've covered a range of linguistic devices. Again, we're aiming for about 5, possibly 6. The vocabulary on the right hand side, can you see those words warrior and enmity? Again, directly lifted. So not thinking again, I'm just organising my thoughts. Then I've decided I'm going to talk about the colour of that sea. For me is white. What kind of white? I've made it really specific, milky white. Reminds me of the Dulux colours there. And I'm going to use my lovely tier 2 vocabulary, impenetrable. Impenetrable mist. Normally mist can be penetrated, you can go through it, but this is impenetrable, so it makes it seem like it's a barrier that you can't get through. Again, just describing the waves of savage, and then taking those ideas of loss and vulnerability, of the train being like a child. Look back, have a look on the notes. I scrolled down, it's all there, and then about those houses gazing down. Okay, then bottom right hand side, just going to think about how to vary that punctuation. What I will do is at the top of my piece of writing, I will write out the 5 punctuation marks I intend to use. I might use more than that. I'm not going to restrict myself. Again, I will tick them off as I'm going through, making sure that I've followed my plan. Right, after this, just pause the video, have a chance to practice yourself. You might want to do 3 or 4 different plans. It doesn't matter how long it takes you at this stage. We're not thinking about timings until we get nearer to the exam. We just want to make sure that you know what you're doing. You've got it clear in your head. If you need to go on to do a quick Google search and find out what some of these linguistic devices are, that's absolutely fine. Similarly, go back in your exercise books. Your teacher would have taught you metaphor, simile, personification. They would have also taught you the difference between complex, compound, simple and minor sentences. Don't be afraid to take time to go back to your notes. At this stage, you need to make sure it's embedded in your head. You know what you're doing. And if you're confused, either email or talk directly to your teacher and ask them for advice so that you can have good practice. Sometimes I think seeing something in pictorial form like this can help you to remember how to structure your writing. So if you have a look, it's like an hourglass. It goes out, in and out, like the crinoline dress of a Victorian lady. So as long as you've got a wide view going into narrow and coming out again, it really doesn't matter what order you do these things in. But obviously you do want to start with the overview and end with the last impression. Everything else you can just mix up into whatever way you think is going to be best for your reader. So to reiterate the key messages that we've explored so far in this session, descriptive writing is very much a shared experience between the writer and the reader, lifting them from the place they are and transporting them into your world. Next thing is stage 1, look at the image, just generate some questions and then start to make some annotations. Stage 2 is your planning, and then after you've done that, the whole planning stage coming to about 15 minutes, then you should be able to write with confidence, and that's 25 to 30 minutes. And if you notice, you need to just give yourself within that time about 3 or 4 minutes checking time. Have you spelled things as correctly as you can without a dictionary? Have you used a variety of sentence structures? But if you've looked at all the planning beforehand and you've done the thinking really carefully, you should really be limiting your errors anyway, because you've made more of a deliberate choice of how you're writing things rather than just writing things in the rush at the moment. Okay, so we're aiming really for about 1.5 to 2 sides, depending on the size of your writing and how quickly you can write. We often say that quality is much better than quantity, so don't think there's lots that needs to be written. It's really about how you're sharing that experience with your reader that's the priority. That's it then. That's looking through the planning stage. So thank you very much for listening to this session. I hope you found it useful. All the other slides in this presentation are just exemplar, different examples that you can work your way through. And if you go back to slide 11, you can print it off or copy and help yourself to plan in more detail. The more advanced you become, the more practiced and rehearsed, the more confident you are, the more you'll be able to reduce your planning down to about 15 minutes. However, take as long as you need at this stage. It's important it's embedded in your mind. Good luck and work hard. Thank you.